Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast, part of the 440 Sports Network. My name is Brandon Bigsby, alongside two of the best, Joey Dwyer and Elena Morris. Joey, Elena, how are you guys doing? Are you ready to talk some Vanderbilt women's basketball?
I'm always ready to talk about Vanderbilt women's basketball, Brandon.
Brandon, thanks for having me. I'm glad I could be in the presence of two greats.
Well, a lot to cover today. We're going to be going through multiple different things, a look at last season, a look at this coming season. But before we do start, we want to go ahead and take the time to thank our presenting basketball sponsor, The Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time away from doing the things that you truly enjoy? Well, let the laundry professionals at The Wash House take care of that for you. With two convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry, and the professionals at The Wash House can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, which is your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. You can go online to washhouseclean.com, or you can stop in today and get your time back. Elena, Joey, Vanderbilt women's basketball probably in as great a shape as we've seen it in the past decade. Finished 23-10 last season, made it to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. It feels like head coach Shea Ralph and this program really have about as much momentum as we have seen probably really since all the way back in the Holcomb days. And Elena, I'll start with you. Just kind of what is your overall summary of last season? So many positives to take from so many different things, and a lot of those positives coming back into this season as well.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, they had a great season last year, and just thinking back to it before it even started, they were picked to finish dead last in the SEC. They finished sixth, so they most definitely exceeded those expectations. I know at one point talking to Coach Ralph, she said that it was only Vanderbilt who really believed in itself, but it now seems like after the year that they had last year, they're starting to get more of the recognition that they feel like they deserve.
Yeah,
Yeah, it definitely feels that way.
I think the program's in a really healthy state, Brandon. Like they had come into last year, and I think they were kind of at the start of their build in a sense. Obviously, getting Jordan Cambridge and Iona Moore back healthy was big for them, and that felt like maybe the victory of the season. But as it kind of went on, you kind of could tell that that team was for real, and you kind of tell that this thing was built well and was built to succeed sustainably. And I think that's something that really has stuck with me. It's not just that they had a few seniors that really carried them; it's that they have a sustainable kind of model and a sustainable way they want to build it. And it feels like they are set up to be a consistently successful program if Shea Ralph plays her cards right. And I think with this roster this year, she certainly has, Brandon.
Yeah, you mentioned that, Joey, the roster this year. A lot of that roster from last season's team coming back to this season. A couple of departures that will be notable. Obviously, the big one, Jordan Cambridge, the six-year senior, the all-time steals leader for this Vanderbilt team, now graduated out of eligibility. The other three, though, players that we didn't really see get too much playing time. Ryan Allen, someone that played a little bit over 6 minutes per game. She transferred to Villanova. Bella LaChance, who really, I think, was one of the stabilizers and one of the players that I think really helped establish the culture and kind of ushered in the new era with Shea Ralph. She was actually the last player, along with Cambridge, that was from the Stephanie White era that is on this team. So no other players that were on any of her teams are on the roster anymore. And then Bailey Gilmore as well, someone that was a redshirt freshman last year. She ended up transferring to Memphis. But outside of those four, and really outside Jordan Cambridge, Joey, not a lot of players that Vanderbilt is losing that really played significant time. So not only are you going to see new talent come in, but a lot of the chemistry and the depth that we saw from this Vanderbilt team last season going to carry over into this next season as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament to what they've kind of built a lot of the time in today's age, and maybe not as much in women's basketball as men's basketball, but you see a ton of roster turnover. And Shea Ralph has really been able to maintain a core. And I think that's, again, a testament to what they've built, the culture that they have. I think that's something that's been really important to them. And it's important to everybody. But I think the way that they've executed it is a lot more admirable than how other people have. And I think that's really benefited them. Obviously, getting Iona Moore back is going to be tremendous. And then they've got a lot of other players that are going to be factors for them that were factors last year. And I think their development model as well is something that is encouraging to me that they could actually have, significant leaps from their players. And I think they are set up to where, Elena, they've got a chance to maybe maximize what they had more than they even did last year, just because they have a core back, they have some chemistry back, and I think if you look at the roster, they've got a lot of what you want. Obviously, the front court's going to be the question, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. But they have a bona fide star in Iona Moore from the looks of it. They have the depth, and they've got a lot of girls that can make leaps. And I think that's a pretty encouraging sign.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we talked about the players who transferred out of the program, but besides Jordan Cambridge, that was the main piece that left. But what they brought in, just about all those players can I can imagine them seeing the floor at some point. Two freshmen, two transfers. We can dive into that. I kind of want to start out with the transfers first, though. Two players who have been in college basketball for a while, Jane Nwaba from Pepperdine and Leilani Kapanis from Penn State, both started at their previous schools. Those are two players who I think can really find their role in this Vanderbilt team. They've got a lot of experience, and so those are two people who are going to be really interesting to see how they're used by Shea Ralph.
Yeah, I think it's a good point too, Elena, that you mentioned the experience with both of them because it feels like when Vanderbilt went into the transfer portal, you didn't really see too much noise about who they were going after, but it felt like most of the names that you did see them connected to, that was really the one thing that they all had in common was just their experience. And Jane Nwaba, obviously someone that was great over at Pepperdine, comes in as a graduate transfer, was an all WCC honorable mention. She's one of those players where like the stats don't necessarily pop out to you immediately, but she's someone that played in over 100 games for them and started in 64 of them, had 9 doubles just this past season. I think she's someone that really can kind of come in and increase that depth. And then you mentioned Kapanis as well, who's someone I really like really a lot. I think she was probably one of the more underrated players in the Big Ten last season, was an honorable Big Ten mention at the end of the year, averaged 11 points per game, over 6 rebounds per game, played in over 26 minutes as well. So I think that she's someone that can really help them out when you do have other players that are coming out like Blake's, like Moore, that can kind of fill up that guard depth a little bit. And the guard depth obviously was something that Vanderbilt did have a bit of last season, but I think that she really does kind of put it into that extra level because not only is she experienced, but she also has been able to really show herself to be one of the better players and a really high end defender as well.
Yeah, I think their transfer class is interesting to me because you look at what they had coming back, and it's kind of a double-edged sword when you go in the portal, right? You look at what they have back, and people want to play for a team that's going to be competitive and a team that's got a chance to win. But also, particularly in the front court, where I think they really needed a transfer and maybe they didn't get one, it's a tough pitch because Sasha Washington is coming back. She played a lot last year. She's going to play a lot this year. You almost need to convince somebody to come in and be a backup, and that's difficult to do. And a lot of their transfers and both of their transfers are going to have to earn it. And they were able to convince two good players to come in and earn it, Elena. And I think that's a real positive sign about kind of the belief externally in the roster they have and what they were able to do in the portal, especially with Kapanis. I think is going to be something that helps them throughout the year because Cambridge leaving obviously leaves a dent, but when you have 2 point guards with Kapanis, who obviously a pretty highly touted defender, and Michaela Blakes, who seems to kind of have it all as a 5 star, as they say 5 stars are going to 5 star, I think they've got a chance to really be solid in the backcourt.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you brought up the defensive presence that Kapanis brings, and that was the next point I was going to bring up is she's got over 200 steals in her 3 years at Penn State. Of course, losing Jordan Cambridge is a big deal, but I think that Kapanis will come in and help relieve some of that. She's going to be someone who I think is incredibly important on the defensive end. It seems like she's not like the quicker in your face guard, but she's very physical and will make you know that she's there and she's going to play you right up on you the entire game. She kind of has that more aggressive play style. And then, of course, you mentioned Michaela Blakes, the 5 star freshman. She came in with just about every accolade possible. And then their other freshmen, we haven't talked about her as much. Trinity Wilson, I know it might take her a little bit to develop, but she's got the size. I believe she's listed at 6'3", over 1,000 rebounds, over 1,000 points in high school. So I'm not totally sure how much we're going to see her, but they've obviously see something in her, I guess, to work with in the years coming. And then someone who's obviously not a transfer, but I think we should talk about is Madison Green. They're getting her back off an injury. We only saw her in 11 games last year, and I think she could also be very important to Vanderbilt this season.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And, we've talked a little bit about depth, but I think that's the thing with all of those additions that make them so key is that not only does it increase that depth, but all of them are able to do so many different things on different spots of the floor. And I think that Blake's especially is someone that I'm really interested in because, a lot of these players we kind of talk about as players that can come in off of the bench and really provide a good 15 to 20 minutes per game. But I think with Michaela Blake's, just considering the pedigree and what she's capable of, I think there could be a chance that she starts more than half of the games this year, especially as she kind of gets herself more in tune with just the college level game. Obviously, even though she's a 5-star, there probably will be that adjustment period, which is always expected and understandable. But I think Blake's is someone that everyone on West End is super excited about. A McDonald's All-American, as you mentioned, Elena. She was New Jersey's 2024 Gatorade Player of the Year, can do a little bit of everything, can play defense, can make plays, a really good shooter if you saw her too in the McDonald's All-American game. She's someone that has really good range, which is always something that you want to add, especially to a Vanderbilt team that was able to shoot a little bit last season, but definitely would not be mad to see one more player that has some of that long range add to that list. So I think she's someone too that I'm really interested to see in terms of where she ends up fitting in and potentially if she can potentially slot herself into that lineup to fill that role that Jordan Cambridge was in these last few years as well.
Yeah, with Michaela Blake's, it's interesting to me because obviously this has been said about a lot of Vanderbilt teams that didn't perform over the years, especially football teams with Clark Lee and kind of the supposed depth they built up on a 2-10 team. But Michaela Blake's, I think, would start for a lot of Vanderbilt teams as a freshman, like undoubtedly. This team, I'm not sure. Kaepernick is experienced; she can defend. Um, she's proven it at a high level. Iona Moore obviously is going to start at the 2, and then Madison Green obviously going to be a factor. I think they might win another tournament game if they had Madison Green on their roster last year. So you just look at it, somebody's got to be the odd man out there, and it might be Michaela Blake's just because of her age. But if you look at what they've built up, I think Michaela Blake's maybe not being a bona fide starter is a real testament to that, and especially their backcourt depth. I think they have good wing depth and front court depth as well, especially the wing with Justine Passad and a lot of other pieces there, a lot of old pieces there. But at guard, it specifically sticks out to me because, again, Michaela Blake's in the past, some Stephanie White teams, on some maybe even Shea Ralph teams is going to start undoubtedly. And you look at this year's roster, somebody's got to come off the bench, Elena, and I think that's an encouraging sign that maybe there's 4 who are deserving to start, but they don't have room for all of them.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a couple players coming off the bench that you could easily put in that starting lineup. But of course, you don't have room for them all. And because of that, I think that for the first few games at least, especially with Madison Green coming off that ACL tear, her playing time is definitely going to be interesting. I'm not sure exactly if she'll be ready by the first game or how that's going to look, but she obviously, could start at some point or play a lot of minutes. And of course, they've got other pieces. It depends on, the way they want to go. If you want to play bigger, or if you want to try to go smaller with more guards. And so I feel like, the first couple of games, we should be able to expect the fact that the lineup is not going to be the same. I think there'll probably be a couple players who will stick in that lineup. Iona Moore, as you mentioned, Sasha Washington, I don't think is going to move out of that lineup, but those other couple spots, I think that we're going to see a different starting 5, especially at the beginning of the year, while, Shea Ralph and companies just kind of get a feel for what she's got and until she finds something that she likes. And last year it took her a little bit. We didn't see Camille Pierre start until the SEC until SEC play, and so it's definitely going to be interesting to see the way they go about managing what they've got.
So I'm going to ask you both something and I'll give mine at the end as well. Elena, I'll start with you. On July 9th, season opener, what to you would be your starting lineup prediction for his Vanderbilt team? Because there are really so many options I think you can go with. So I think we'll probably more than likely have a different variance potentially, especially at the guard spot, potentially at the 4 as well. But Elena, I'll start with you. As of today, what would your starting 5 be for this Vanderbilt team?
All right, put me on the spot first. That's fine. The 3 I feel like totally in my mind are kind of locked into that starting 5 are Iona Moore, Sasha Washington, and Camille Pierre at the 4. I think those 3 are more sure for me. Those other 2 spots are very interesting. I'm not going to put Madison Green in there quite yet just because I don't know how far along she is with her recovery. But for me, I feel like Leilani Kapanis is going to slide into one of those spots. She started for Penn State, great defender. I think that, they'll use her to essentially replace what Jordan Cambridge brought defensively. And that other one, Joey, I'm just gonna say this to disagree with you. I'll put Michaela Blakes in there. I think just the way that she plays basketball, it's hard not to start her. What you could also do is kind of go to Jordan Oliver because we have seen her run the point guard many times. But for me, I would have to go with Michaela Blakes, Leilani Kapanis, Iona Moore, Camille Pierre, and Sasha Washington.
Yeah, I think my point was more so that her not being like a guaranteed starter is a thing. And I think that was kind of the point you got it as well. They're going to have three older pieces, and maybe Camille Pierre is not as old, but they're going to have three proven pieces who are going to be guaranteed starters. And Michaela Blake's, I don't know if she's necessarily one. It's difficult to, because I think I have the same four with Kapanis, Washington, Moore, and Pierre. The fifth spot is dang near impossible to figure out, though. You have Michaela Blake's, who I've been a Michaela Blake's truther since they got her, I think, but obviously a freshman. And then you've got some older pieces, Justine Passat, who Elena wrote a really good feature on a few days ago. Obviously a piece who's contributed for them before. Maybe she'll have to defend a little more to actually be a starter. Maybe Shea Ralph wants to set the tone a little bit in terms of her defense, which is why I think Kapanis would probably start over Blake's if they had to pick between the two. Jordan Oliver, though, really going to defend and kind of be a glue type player of sorts. And I think that's something that Shea Ralph really values as well. And somebody we haven't talked about, Aga Makira, obviously has really had a nice summer playing overseas. So I don't know, Elena. There's four that I think could really be factors there. I would probably just go with Jordan Oliver because of the experience, because she started so much before. But Michaela Blake's obviously going to be a factor. And I think opening night is a different question than when they're in the SEC tournament. I think opening night, it's probably going to be some vets. Opening night, my guess would be Kapanis, Moore, Oliver, Pierre, Washington. As you get towards the end of the year, though, I think Michaela Blake's probably finds her way into that, Brandon.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I definitely kind of tossed around with this question a bit, and I think that the two spots where I had the most trouble was the same where you mentioned, Atlanta, the one spot and the four spot, because the amount of times I think I flip-flop between Jordan Oliver and Michaela Blake's is insane, because you have someone like Michaela Blake's that is just so talented. You know everything that she's able to do, everything that she's capable of, but at the same time, you also look at Jordan Oliver and everything that she's able to do to be a steadying playmaker that can kind of do a little bit of everything for this team. I definitely think that Leilani Kapanis is someone that will probably be in the starting lineup a good bit just because of what she's able to do both on the offensive and defensive end. I think she's arguably going to be able to come in and be one of their better two end players in terms of what she can do on both sides of the floor. Moore, Washington, I think those two are pretty well set. Same with Camille Pierre, but again, it's just so interesting to see, because at that four spot again, you can start Pierre, or you can go with someone like Passat, or you can go with someone like Makira, who I think, at least personally for me, might be the most underrated player potentially on this roster. I think that she's someone that really came in as a young player last year and showed a lot of potential. And as you mentioned, Joey, you see what she's been able to do so far in the international stage over the summer. She's had a really amazing summer, actually put up a double-double just a day or two ago. So it's going to be interesting because it kind of does have a bit of a revolving door feeling, but not because of just injuries or performance, but just because Shea Ralph has that many options available to her, which is a coach's dream, really. And I want to kind of ask you guys, because I think that bears a really good question, just knowing what this roster looks like, knowing what this team did last season. Joey, I'll start with you. It kind of makes me want to talk about what the expectations for this team could be coming into this season, because 23-10 in a tournament appearance is hard to top, but at the same time, you also feel like this team is very capable of doing it. I know you mentioned, Joey, this team winning another SEC tournament game potentially. So I'm kind of curious where you both think the expectations could be for this team coming into this season.
I think it'd be a disappointing year for them if they're not a tournament team. And that's crazy to say about a program that has really struggled to get there. But with the group they have, I mean, I don't see a way that you would be happy with the year if they don't make the tournament. I think maybe even get there and win a game or two is the expectation. And more so than that, I think the bigger thing for me is they should not be a bubble team with the roster they have. They are really good. Like they should have a good enough resume to be able to be an 8 or a 9, right? So I think the front court concerns me. And that's why I have kind of held back on maybe making more declarations. And we have to see if Iona Moore can actually be an SEC level star consistently, because obviously she's done it in spurts. Obviously, the Kentucky game last year, I think she had 37 points. And I think she's definitely their most talented scorer. Camille Pierre might be their most talented overall player. But if Iona Moore can step into stardom and their front court can hold their own, which I have concerns about, especially after we were in Knoxville last year, Elena and I watching Tamora Key kind of take Vandy's lunch money down there. I think that was a moment that has kind of stuck in my mind as maybe a concerning one. But as I look forward, I just don't see how they're not a tournament team with what they have, barring injury, barring, I don't know, locker room issues, Elena. Who knows? But the expectation, I think, has to be the tournament. And I would go as far to say it probably shouldn't just be the tournament, should probably be being a higher seed than they were last year. I think their team on paper has to be better than it was last year. It looks like a much better roster to me, and it was a pretty dang good roster last year. But Atlanta, I think they're a tournament team. How much can they be, or how much success can they have once they get there? I think is the bigger question in terms of expectations for me.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things I just kind of want to take away from listening to all this. We're debating about the starting five, and I mean that just proves how much depth they have. I mean, we're having to mention Justine Pissot coming off the bench, or Aga, or Jordan Oliver, and someone else that we didn't mention that I feel like we probably should talk about more is it seems that Jane Nwaba, the Pepperdine transfer, can also slot into a role. And so if you can go as far as 11 players that you're comfortable with playing, I completely agree with you. You've got to get there, you've got to be a higher seed and win a game. And I feel like, although they were finished the year with 23 wins, the expectation for this year is much higher. And I think that they're already starting to do a good job setting themselves up to prepare for that. I don't think they knew exactly how they were going to do last year, and that was a little bit of a reflection in their non-conference schedule. They didn't play a whole lot of big teams. They played at NC State, and then they played Iowa State in a neutral site. And the non-conference schedule hasn't been released yet, but there have been a couple games that have, and we already know about 3 Power 4 teams. You play at Miami for the ACC SEC Challenge, and then you play in a tournament, and I believe the teams in the field are Michigan State, Arizona, and Cal Berkeley, and those are more Power 4 teams. And so the fact that they're already setting up more non-conference game against better opponents to help strengthen their schedule too, I think they're preparing for a type of year and preparing for a tournament and be able to make a run. But it's just going to be interesting because the SEC is going to look different. I mean, South Carolina, they won the national championship last year, but you're also adding in Texas and Oklahoma. And so it's just going to be really interesting to see how it unfolds. But I do think that their ceiling is higher, and I think that they've got a lot to work with just looking at the depth that they've already got on this roster.
Yeah, and I think that that's the big thing that I want to see, especially considering after last year. I think something you mentioned, Elena, that is really true that people can often forget is that this is a Vanderbilt team that I don't think anyone really expected them to come out and do what they did last season. I don't even know if they necessarily expected to come out of the gates as a 16-1 team to start out in mid-January. And, you kind of said it, the non-conference schedule reflected that, I think, a little bit. But when they saw what that team was truly capable of, I think that was when you knew, like, okay, this is a squad that can go in and make a nice little run. And they were able to do that. I think the one thing that I don't want to say is a concern, but I definitely want to see compared to last season is can they get that consistent winning down during SEC play? Because it felt like there were a lot of times to where it was very up and down. They had that tough stretch from mid-January to early February where they went 1-6 in their 7 games. 2 of those losses to South Carolina and LSU. So definitely pretty understandable to drop those, but they also had some games I think they would love to have had back that they probably feel like they could have or should have won. Missouri being one that sticks out, Alabama, the game that you mentioned in Knoxville in January, Joey, that you felt like Vanderbilt probably had a good chance to come in and compete, and you could tell Tennessee was just a little bit better in that game. So I think that that's another thing too. Can they really nail in that consistent SEC play compared to what we saw last year? And I mean, even at the end of the year, even though they got on a bit of a roll going into the SEC tournament, the first game they played against an 11 seed in Florida, they dropped. And that was probably one of the performances that they would love to have had back looking back. And you're kind of worried at that time, considering they were a bubble team, like, is this going to be a game that cost them the tournament? And I think that the big goal was for them to not be in that same position to where they're one of the last 4 teams in and they're biting their nails on selection Sunday, just kind of hoping that they got in. But I do kind of want to touch on the two new SEC teams, though, Elena. I know you mentioned that as well. Both Texas and Oklahoma were champions of the Big 12 last year. Texas winning the Big 12 tournament, the number one seed or one of the number one seeds in the NCAA tournament, made it all the way to Elite Eight. And Oklahoma, who finishes the Big 12 regular season champion. So that's kind of another piece to this large puzzle, is that not only are you in arguably the strongest conference in the country, but it also just got much stronger with two of the champions from another great conference just a season ago. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see where Vanderbilt slots in, not just because of where the SEC goes last year to this year, but because you have two of the top 25 in the teams in the country last year being added into the fold now as well.
Yeah, just kind of like looking at it as a whole, it's not just adding Texas and Oklahoma because those are two wonderful programs and they clearly have proven themselves. But you have to look at the other SEC teams. I mean, Kentucky just hired Kenny Brooks from Virginia Tech. He brought his star point guard, Georgia Amore, with him. Tennessee made a big change in hiring Kim Caldwell and letting go of Kelly Harper. So that's going to be a different look for Tennessee, who comes to Vanderbilt this year. And that's the other thing, too, is all SEC teams play each other once, except for, one team will play each other twice. Vanderbilt will play Ole Miss. That's another good team. And so not just adding Texas and Oklahoma, there were some big changes within the other teams too. LSU lost some star power, but they've got Kim Mulkey, so you can expect them to, perform at a high level. So this is just going to be a very competitive conference, but it's also going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think they're going to get more teams in than they have in the past too. And that's something that I've kind of looked at with there being so many teams in the league. Does that put Vandy at a disadvantage? And I've kind of come to the conclusion that it maybe doesn't, especially on the men's side, because I think on the men's side they're going to get 10 or maybe 11 teams in, which is just unbelievable to think about. And that's probably going to happen on the women's side as well, to where if Vandy can be a be a team that's reckoned with in non-conference play and then get into conference play and be a little bit better than they were last year, I think the SEC is going to have so much respect just in terms of the computer numbers and in terms of national perception that it's not going to hurt them that there's so many more teams. I will say though, complete travesty that they're not going to Knoxville this year. I don't get like why. How does that rivalry not renew in both places? Whatever, but I think it is interesting just to look at the schedule as a whole. And I don't know if the league's going to be as top heavy as it was last year, but it feels like there's not going to be any games that are really like givens. Like last year, Kentucky was maybe a given, and obviously no game is really a given in the SEC. But I don't know if there's going to be a real team that you look at and you say, "Wow, they're unprepared to play," or they're going to be a lot easier than the next team. There's not going to be a South Carolina, I would guess. Maybe South Carolina will win the league still, but probably not as much of a juggernaut as they were last year with what they lost. But also, probably not a whole lot of teams that you're going to be able to push over, Brandon.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the scheduling too, because kind of connecting a point that both you and Elena made. Vanderbilt already, from some of the games that we've seen come out from their non-conference schedule, have scheduled some really good, I guess now Power 4, Power 5 technically still opponents. So not only do you have a much deeper SEC schedule and an SEC that I think that they're probably, though it's not necessarily a top heavy conference compared to last season, I think there's a conference that you can look up and down and say there are 10 to 12 really good teams that have a genuine shot at being able to make the NCAA tournament. And you add that on to having the SEC tournament that you have to play through and then having a really good non-con. I think that's going to be another interesting piece of this Vanderbilt team. It's just how do they look in some of those games before conference play, because the conference schedule is so tough as it is, playing all of these different opponents one time, and so many of them will probably be either locks in the tournament or at least in that conversation. Adding that in with the non-conference that is significantly tougher than last season. So I think the schedule definitely does have kind of a bit of a piece to play with this. And I think that goes back to kind of what the expectations could be. Like, I don't know if Vanderbilt will be a 23-10 team, if that could be higher or lower, because that schedule is so tough, even with Vanderbilt being such a good team and arguably even a better team than what they were just this season.
And I think their
I think
computer numbers will be better as a result of that as well, Elena.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, is the fact that their record might not look as pretty on paper, like they might have more losses, but I think they're going to be playing at a more competitive level, which, I mean, obviously you guys have seen it. As long as you're playing at a higher level and, I guess now with all the numbers, you've got losses that are considered to be good losses. So they might have a worse record on paper, but they might be a higher seed in the NCAA tournament because of it. But you make a good point with the league, being so deep. I'm just thinking about the fact that, maybe one night the 10th best team in the SEC could beat the fourth best team in the SEC. And that's not impossible at this point because just looking at it you're right, from top to bottom, this is a league that is very good. And it's hard to argue against the fact that there's a better basketball conference right now than the SEC.
Right. And Vanderbilt's just got to find its place. And I think that's the big thing is they've got to do enough in SEC play to where they're not using it as an excuse and they're using it to their advantage. Because obviously their computer numbers throughout non-conference play last year when they were 17-1, I don't know if they would have made the tournament at 17-1, which is crazy to say, but their numbers were just so low. This year, I think they'll be a little bit better if they schedule a little more aggressively in non-conference play, which it seems like they probably will do. They're probably not going to win 23 games this year, though, I would guess. And that might not be the worst thing ever. They might be able to get into SEC play and they'll only have 13 wins rather than 17 or 18. But if they go win 6 or 7 games and they get to 20 wins, they might be a significantly higher seed than they were last year just because their numbers are better and because the league is a little bit more respected. And obviously it was respected last year, but I think people are going to realize what kind of gauntlet they're running. And if they can at least keep their head above water, I think they'll be rewarded for it come March.
And
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I think that this is where having a head coach in your building like Shea Ralph really does come to such a big advantage as well, because not only is she someone that's so great with the X's and O's and being able to put a team together, but I think you'd have a hard time finding a coach that does a better job of really being able to rally a group of players together to understand the situation. It felt like last year, whenever Vanderbilt was in a scenario to where they really kind of were in a tight scenario and they really needed to kind of lock in, mentally and go out and back that up on the floor. It felt like they were always able to do that, especially down the stretch in the last 5 or 6 games of the season, where it felt like, okay, Vanderbilt pretty much needs to win at least 5 of these next 6 games to really have a true resume to get in. And they were able to go in and do that. You go in against a tough Columbia team that obviously there was a lot of chatter in that game about Vanderbilt getting in and the SEC favoritism, so to speak, from that game. But Vanderbilt came in and took care of business. And I think that having a coach like Shea Ralph that really has established her culture and the standard that she wants to set for this Vanderbilt program, which for head coach coming in is always one of the biggest things that you really have to do. I think that this is where having a coach like Shea Ralph really does give Vanderbilt that extra advantage just because of how good she is, not just at being able to draw plays and get lineups together, but how she is at really getting a team to come together and perform at that high level.
Yeah, and about Shea Ralph as well as the scheduling, I can't think with the point that I thought of, and I might be wrong with the numbers, but from my knowledge, I believe they only played 2 Power 5 teams last year in the non-conference. We already know that they're at least playing 3. So they're clearly scheduling more aggressive. We know of 3. Obviously, the rest of that non-conference schedule hasn't been released yet, and we can obviously assess that going forward. But they are clearly planning to play those high caliber teams. And then, when it comes to Shea Ralph, she's been around winning. She won a national championship herself as a player. She won multiple as an assistant coach at UConn. So she clearly knows how to win. And you're right. She made it a point at the end of the year and, let her team know that they had to win some games down the stretch if they wanted to be considered to get into the NCAA tournament. And she clearly did just that. And it seems that Coach Ralph really knows how to rally her team together and get them to lock in the moments that they need to.
Yeah, and I think the expectations are raised, and having a coach like Shea Ralph probably an advantage in that way because I think you look at other teams who at Vanderbilt who have had expectations raised, and a lot of the time that has kind of got to them. But it feels like this program is structured in a way to where they'll be able to kind of embrace that and deal with it in a better way. It's going to be a big year for them, Brandon, and I think if they can take another step forward, it's really going to continue to evolve their recruiting momentum, which obviously took a step forward this year. And with the new practice facility, I think they're really set up to do some good things.
Yeah, I think you just kind of walk around West End a little bit, and with this Vanderbilt women's basketball team, it's just a different feeling, I think, than there has been really since about over a decade ago when Vanderbilt was a team making the tournament consistently every single year. And this is a team that gave the fans something to watch and be excited about when men's basketball was kind of down and baseball was in kind of its own up and down swing. So this is a women's basketball team that I think provided a lot of excitement for Vanderbilt fans this year, as well as a bit of stability. And Joey, Atlanta, we covered a lot. We got it all through. Is there anything else that you guys want to quickly touch on here before we wrap things up?
I think just my biggest takeaway is the fact that none of us, had a solid starting five. That just speaks to the amount of depth that this team has. And, it'll take a little bit to figure out how all the pieces are going to work together. But if they do it right, I think that Vanderbilt has a good chance to set themselves up for some success.
Yeah, I think they certainly have a chance at success this year and moving forward. I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but Shea Ralph has really built this thing out the way I think a lot of people hope Mark Byington is able to do. I think this is an example of what Vanderbilt basketball can be. And if they have another good year this year, I think they're going to be a program that a lot of people look at as kind of an example of what you can do at Vanderbilt. And I think that's, again, a real testament to what Shea Ralph has done, but also really enjoy being on with you guys. Obviously, all three of us good friends, all three of us representing Lipscomb Sports Media Department. So thank you to Chris for allowing this to be the case, but I'll let Brandon wrap us up.
Yeah, big thank you to everyone at Vandy Sports for allowing us to come on and do what we do as three journalists, as three friends. Thank you all for listening. Another big thank you to our sponsor in the Wash House for everything they do to help make our coverage possible. Thank you all for tuning in. This will not be the last time we talk Vanderbilt women's basketball, so make sure you keep in touch with everything that we have for coverage coming up for that. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day, everybody.